and it can become non-renewable if used unsustainably. A lower energy density than most fossil fuels. If not managed or monitored, it can be harvested at an unsustainable rate, damage ecosystems, produce harmful air pollutants, use a lot of water, and produce net global warming emissions.
Well, those are a lot of points, but I'm hoping that because of how good and how much potential there is for biomass, I really hope that people can see where it can go from here. Tiernan brought out a lot of really good points that were advantages, and I hope that these small disadvantages that we just brought up, they don't discourage people from looking at biomass as a really effective way of going into the future for a fuel source. So, but Grace, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Welcome back, Cam. Backstage just a second ago, we were talking about methane gas, and I had brought it up on set a few minutes ago, and you'd said that you had some concerns about methane gas. Would you mind sharing that with me?
Yeah, so methane gas from landfills, I mean, it is a good way to use biofuels, but it's highly dangerous and possesses a risk for leakage into the surrounding areas around the landfills. And some other types which I feel would be more effective fuel sources would be ethanol and biodiesel. And ethanol is energy that is extracted from the cellulose in plants, and already a lot of our gas, like 15 to 85% of it, is ethanol,
Okay.
and it goes into our cars. And then biodiesel is, we basically use oil, like food oil, and so it allows us to use food sources that can be used for energy. The issues with ethanol is that to grow it in a large amount that would be useful, it'd take a lot of land space, and using the food oil, that would take away from our reserves for cooking.
Which is a huge issue.
Yeah.
We need more food. So definitely something that we'll be looking into more.
Yeah.
So we've just discussed some disadvantages for biomass.
Yeah.
But the big question that I've got for this evening is, how do I convert that into energy?
So biomass can be converted into energy in two main ways. One is creating heat, where you burn it and heat water, creates vapor, and the other is to process it into biofuel. So for the first way in which you heat the biomass, what you do is it goes through a process called torrefaction, where the biomass is heated to 200 to 320 degrees Celsius, where it loses 80% of its mass, but 90% of the energy is retained, and the lost energy is used to power the torrefaction process. What's left is compressed into briquettes, and these briquettes can either be burned directly to create steam, or they can be heated without oxygen to produce solid and liquid components that can then be used to create energy. And then there's a third way to use these briquettes, in which you have anaerobic decomposition, where microorganisms are introduced without oxygen, and they decompose the briquettes, and then methane is produced, which can be used in the ways methane is normally used. And then the other way, which is biofuel, is biomass is actually the only renewable energy source that can be converted into in a liquid form. Ethanol, which is created by fermenting biomass, and that's produces the ethanol. And the advantages to ethanol is that when burned, it only produces flame and water vapor, and there's no smoke, so there's no particulates that escape into the air. And that's pretty much the two main ways that biomass is turned into energy.
Very cool, very interesting. Well, I see a lot of potential in it, so hopefully there will be different ways that we can get some energy out of biomass in the future. But for now, that's what we've got. So, but thank you for coming on, and thank you for sharing that with us, Cam. Grace, welcome back. So, pretty much came to the end of the program now. We've covered history of biomass. We've talked about the different types of biomass, some advantages and disadvantages, how to turn it into energy. We've learned a lot about biomass today. So I want to end it to talk about the environmental impacts of biomass. Obviously, in the field that we're in, we wouldn't be here talking about alternative fuels if we didn't worry about the environment. It's obviously a major concern, And I think that people are reluctant to try out these new alternative fuel sources because they're worried about what is the environmental impact going to be. So if you could share with our viewers, talk with them about the environmental impacts and really what makes biomass good or bad.
Okay. So some of the environmental impacts are displacement of fossil fuel use. This would lead to the reduction in air pollution and acid rain. It also, in another environmental impact, is it releases CO2. This can be negative if the amount of CO2 removed from the atmosphere is less than the amount produced. And plants absorb CO2 when burned. They release the CO2 that is stored inside of them. The released CO2 is reabsorbed in other plants. If biomass was the only fuel source, net CO2 would be zero because the CO2 is on a cycle. It only works if CO2 is not being added from fossil fuels being stored on the earth.
So industries like oil industry are working against making biomass really an effective source.
Yes.
See, so that's another reason why we're almost contradicting ourselves in a lot of our ways.
Very true.
While we're trying to move to an alternative fuel source, and we're really just cutting off our right hand and not being able to go forward. I think the world could see that we could be a lot more effective with our fuels consumption and our fuel sources and where we're going if we would commit to something all at once. We've learned a lot tonight about biofuels. We've learned that they have lots of great advantages and disadvantages, learned about different types, how to convert them to energy. We've also learned that there's a lot of things that need to be improved. Land space, making sure that we're not having huge environmental impacts on the environment, are all things that we're concerned with biomass. But we do see a very promising future in the world of biomass. So thank you for joining us on our episode of Between Two Signs and a Fern. Thank you for watching and learning a little bit more about biomass.